Good turnout, colleagues.
Daisy! Where is that? Is picked up. Lots of GP registration, vastly more successful. So in many
Good morning, colleagues. I just want to quickly say that we're just admitting a lot of people to the session. We've got 106 so far, which is a fantastic turnout for this webinar. If colleagues could all go on mute, we'd be grateful, and also turn cameras off so that we can focus on the speakers who are on camera for us. That would be so helpful. Thank you very much. We'll just give it till 11:05, and I think most people will have joined us then. Okay, just a few more people to join. Can I just ask colleagues who are attending the webinar but not speaking to turn their cameras off, and for everybody to go on mute? That would be really helpful so that we know who's speaking. Thank you. Right, let's make a start. Thank you for joining us this morning at this webinar, which is looking at some of the data issues to do with the new discharge policy, and in particular to look at how a system can come together and manage the data challenge together. So we're going to start with a little bit of housekeeping. The session will be recorded so that we can share the learning, and we will be putting it out on various websites and sharing it with you. So you can use it in your teams, use it in your discussions. Please keep yourself on mute to avoid the background noise. Much as I love to hear people's dogs and chickens and cats and whatever else, sometimes it can be a little bit disruptive. So if you could go on mute, everybody, that's great. We've got some time for questions set aside, but we do really encourage people to use the chat as well, to come into the chat box and put your questions in there and tell us what you're thinking, and also sharing best practice. These sessions are not all about one system saying how it is. We want to hear from you as well. David Neville, if you could go on mute, that would be really great. I think there might be a little bit of playback. Thank you, David. As you can see, if you lose the connection, please can you go back to the link, and if you've got any problems, please email Fiona and she'll be able to help you with it. And we've got copies of the slides available. So my name's Sarah Mitchell, and I work for the Local Government Association, and I lead on all things to do with integration, the social care, particularly the social care role in the discharge policy, but also we work very collaboratively with NHSE and with ESIS, with the Department of Health and Social Care and colleagues in MHCLG to get this discharge process and policy as well established as we can. We know that the new discharge guidance has just been issued again, and we know that we're all still negotiating for further funding. So actually, if anybody's got some really good case examples of how the new discharge policy is working in your area, we really want to hear from you. Stick your name and email address in the chat, and we will make contact. One of the things that's really come out of the new discharge policy is the need to understand the new data set that is related to it, but also to look in the round. And I think that's why we're so keen to hear from Somerset this morning. In the round are all the data that we need to be collecting around demand and capacity, but also around flow and discharge, and how you can do that to enhance the experience that people have, to make sure that people get the right outcomes for care. And then some of the challenges where people have implemented the discharge policy, what does that now mean for what they need to commission or how they need to commission it? We have been doing a whole load of work with systems around how they can implement the policy. And we're really keen to demonstrate and share best practice, but in a way that's supportive. So this is about hearing from a system who've tackled it in the way that they needed to for them. And we're really keen to share that learning, but also to work with systems to say, OK, how can that work for you? How can we get to a place where you could be supported to do the right thing by people and patients in your area? We're also really keen to showcase examples of good practice to influence some of the decisions that get made, and to demonstrate that actually systems can make this work. They can, through the right leadership and the ways of working and the right cultures in how we work together, make this discharge policy work. And also, we're really keen that we don't go back to the pre-COVID days of delayed transfers of care and all the behaviour and the angst and pain that brought all of us across the whole system previously. I think we're all united in that, whether you be from the NHS or social care or the community out there in terms of the care community. So without further ado, I think most of us have joined the chat now. I'm going to hand over to Anna Littlewood and Tim Baronstock from Somerset, and they're going to talk us through their experience. Now, these webinars are really It's a bit like getting back into education mode, because we really want to hear the detail of what's happened. So we'll do questions at the end for Anna and Tim, and questions, if you put them in the chat, we'll bring those together. Thanks very much, Anna. Over to you.
Thanks, Sarah. So I am Anna Littlewood. I'm Deputy Director for Adult Social Services at Somerset County Council, and my colleague Tim is here, though I think he's having some connection. Tim, are you there?
I am here. I'm sorry, I'm not going to trust my camera initially,
Okay.
but yeah, I'm Tim Baverstock. I'm the other Deputy Director at Somerset County Council for Adult Social Care, with responsibility for the adult care provider system, all commissioning, and some of our integration work.
Great. So I cover all the operations, and Tim and I work quite closely in partnership with our health colleagues, actually, across what is now known as the intermediate care model in Somerset. So let me just get my screen up. Okay, so I'm going to keep it on this mode because I don't know how to do it without losing everybody as well. So what we're going to do is talk you through basically how the Somerset system is really set up, just the mechanics of how it works. So you've got that context in your head as we get into the data about how that flow works through the system. We're also going to cover some of the principles that we think fit and work for our discharge model that perhaps could be applied across other systems. And also some of the challenges that we're facing as well. Can somebody go on mute who's not on mute, please? Thank you. So first of all, I do need to tell you that Somerset is a coterminous system. So we have one CCG, we have one county council, we have a very large provider trust that covers the largest acute hospital and all of our community health provision as one organisation. That's a recently merged organisation, April last year. And we also have a smaller NHS trust, hospital trust, who is about to merge with the larger trust. So we appreciate that some of the systems that we're talking to have much more complex organizational structures than that, and perhaps, you know, that has helped us in getting together one version of the truth for the data, one collective vision for how we need hospital discharge to work across the whole system. But we do believe that some of the principles that we use can apply to all systems. So I'll just talk you through this diagram that you can see in front of you is basically showing you how the mechanics work of the system. So on the left hand side, you can see we have the demand, the feeding in of people into the intermediate care system. So our community source is any prevention or diversion that happens in the community. So this is emerging and this is growing for us in terms of demand that comes through to the whole of the intermediate care model. But this is basically all those sort of services that stop people going into hospital. And then in the acute hospital, we have our admission avoidance, so work in the front door, ED, frailty units, etc., turning around at front door, but also obviously, and by far the largest part of our demand is from hospital discharge. And then we have our out of area hospitals as well that also will discharge through this model. What happens in Somerset is that the discharge, all discharge referrals or all diversion referrals will come through one hub for coordinating care. So that's something that we implemented back in the early days of the pandemic. We did it within about 2 weeks, like many systems did, cobbled together a hub that basically takes all referrals across 4 different options. Now, the first option is basically our diversion route. So that's how people can access rapid response. You can also access urgent district nursing, full service, things like that. And the GPs use that line an awful lot. And that line was already set up and established in Somerset as the GP kind of referral route into our community hospitals, sometimes direct referrals into the acutes and to access rapid response. We also have our ambulance service. They can use that number as well to get that diversion route. Option 2 is our pathway 1. D2A. So we call our pathway 1 D2A. It's just something that's kind of stuck in the system, though the discharge to assess principles do apply across all of our home and bedded pathways. So discharge to assess, that's basically the front end of that is getting someone home, stabilised, ready for an assessment, and that assessment is what is their reablement potential. So what potential does this individual have to gain further independence from this sort of their current status? And when they are identified to have potential for reablement, they will go into our reablement service. If at that point you think actually this person doesn't need any reablement, they're perfectly fine to cope on their own or with a bit of voluntary sector support, they will get diverted into community, or indeed the service will stop. Or if at that point you just think actually this person really has maxed out on their ability to be independent, and there's a gap there in their independence, so they need some formal support, and so then they will go to core care at home. So that's our pathway 1. Option 3, this is our bed coordination hub. In Somerset, we have a lot of beds. Community hospital beds, we are blessed, blessing and a curse with a lot of community hospital beds, and we also have some reablement beds. Now, our reablement beds are specifically commissioned wings of care homes or nursing homes, whereby we use them specifically for reablement. We have some that are really good at sort of quick turnaround, very intensive rehab and reablement, with a shorter length of stay, and we have those that are better working with people with more complex needs that have that longer turnaround, work with them for a bit longer. Those people in those longer turnaround beds more likely to end up in a long-term placement than being able to get home. So we have a sort of spectrum of beds in Somerset, and our community hospitals sort of fit in between those two sort of categories. I won't get into the very nitty-gritty details of that, but what we're trying to do is sort of blend all our beds to be able to take all cohorts of people, so working with them to get those skills really consistent across the beds, and the approach really consistent in terms of people going in, getting their goals set and working through to that point where they're safe to be discharged home or onto a placement. And then we also have option 4, which is end of life care. So we coordinate all end of life care through our hub for coordinating care through option 4. And that option will then triage and assess whether someone can be cared for at home. They link with the hospices, and they also will link with our bed hub if they need to access a bed for somebody for end of life care. So that's basically how the model works in its mechanics. I will talk a little bit more about the acute decision making, because that's come up as questions on other seminars that we've done. So I'll go into a bit more detail about that next. But just to say that this is, before we had this one model in Somerset, we did have Home First working. So I think back in 2016, Somerset was one of the worst in the southwest for detox numbers, and so we really had this bit of a burning platform. We really had to do something differently in the system, and at that point we set up a Home First service, which was pathway 1, getting people home, reablement, and the reablement beds part of all of the beds that we've got. So the specifically commissioned bedded units. Some of those were actually within community hospital wards as well, to reable people and get them home. So we had part of the system working in that way up until the end of 2019, where we did a review across Home First, and the systems ask was really, what is the step change that's needed to make this even more effective? Home First had turned the corner on the detox problem and really got that flow going, but we knew that there was much more to do, and that review showed that there was real inconsistencies in pathways across the system. So if you ended up in a community hospital bed, and when we did audits of those people who went to community hospital beds, most of them should have gone through a reablement bed. A lot of them could have gone home actually on the pathway 1. So it was a real sort of mishmash of people going into community hospitals. And actually when they went in there, they couldn't access reablement or out the back door. And so there was inconsistencies. What we found is people on our bedded pathways, they were staying there way too long, like up to the point where they were really super independent and able to do a lot for themselves. Whereas actually there's a point where people are in beds where it's safe for them to go home and continue that reablement. If you have people being discharged from beds home with nothing, their length of stay is too long. So all of this sort of threw it up in the air and said, what is it that we need in Somerset that will bring a step change? And so we decided to bring everything under the umbrella of intermediate care and bring consistency across those pathways, really enforce discharge to assess as a principle that ran throughout those pathways, change the way that decision making was done in the acutes, So that was the vision, and then the pandemic came, and so instead of taking a lovely 12 months of lots of workshops and, you know, participation from staff and people who experience the system, we just had to set it up within, you know, 1 month, 2 months, establish a whole brand new D2A pathway, set up the hub for coordinating care, bring all our beds under one umbrella and coordinate them all from one place. So it was very, very quick to set up intermediate care, but actually, you know, because we'd done the thinking before the pandemic hit, we were able to then take it forward as a strong system. So the principles then that brings this together and makes it work, you know, the first thing I want to say is a strong vision that brings partners together. So if you go back to 2016 in Somerset, it was very much an us and them culture with health and care. You know, health saying, we've got all these detox delays, what are you doing about it? Adult social care, they're your problem, throw them over the fence. Adult social care going, you know, I don't think, you know, who's coming to us and how do we manage that and all that sort of thing. So we come a long way from those conversations, and actually, because we were managed to collectively work together to solve that detox problem, the trust in the system amongst senior leaders really grew, and developing the vision for intermediate care collectively together really set us on that a sort of new journey. So we'd already got very close system relationships. So it's just a natural progression to sort of take this forward. Simplify and standardize as far as possible. Complex systems need simplicity where it makes sense. So where you can make things work in the same way, even if you've got multiple acute trusts who are discharging, multiple receiving organisations in terms of maybe community health provision, adult social care, different adult social care provision, if you can standardise the referral form across all your pathways, standardize your coordinating hub and the way where capacity is coordinated from, and as far as possible standardize the practice then that happens on those pathways as people come out. Use your models for diversion and admission avoidance as well as discharge. Once we had that coordinating hub, it started to open up doors for diversion. So people knew who to ring and how to access something that wasn't just an acute hospital bed, particularly from our frailty units, our ED front door, social workers, we put our social workers in the front door, had that operating across a couple of years now. It was a winter model, it's now an all round year model. You know, helping our ambulance service to really understand how to access and when to access, and accessing reablement and our bedded units much more readily for people who just can't be left at home, and you know, not wanting an acute hospital bed to be the alternative for them. No discharge destination determined from the ward. I'll come on to this in a minute, actually, when I go through the decision making. But try to consolidate where the discharge decision making is done for the actual option and take it off the wards. Coordinate the use of voluntary sector at all decision making points. Again, we'll cover this in our data because that pulls out together. But basically, voluntary sector is your absolute godsend across this whole system. If you want strong pathway zero performance, you need a strong voluntary sector. And in Somerset, again, you know, as we coordinated intermediate care, we suddenly realised, well, we've got all these different contracts for Red Cross coming from different, you know, 2 different acute trusts had one. I think the CCG might have had one. Adult social care had one. And we just brought those all together in one contract saying, this is what we need Red Cross to do across the system. And not just Red Cross. Red Cross is just one of the partners. We tap into all sorts of voluntary sector organisations, and the Red Cross are actually learning from our real on the ground, you know, voluntary sector services about really what they need to do to support discharge and support these sorts of individuals coming out. And we now coordinate all their capacity again from one point. We're there, you know, we will be bringing that into our hub at some point, but at the moment it's done somewhere separately. The outcomes for a person is key indicator of success, not just the flow data. Now, obviously, the flow data is the absolute crunchy numbers, especially when you're under pressure. But once you start capturing outcomes and you start capturing length of stay versus outcomes, oh, actually, if we give someone a bit longer on a pathway, the outcomes are so much better. And you start to get that richness of data coming through the system. You can start having very different conversations, even in times of escalation. yes, flow data is absolutely important for your finger on the pulse, what's happening day to day, and absolutely one version of the truth across the system on flow data is something we really battled for. It's painful, but when you get it and you have to constantly validate it, it really does start to unlock the different type of conversation, because you actually believe when someone says, well, we've got 20 people waiting over here, rather than saying, well, it's not really 20 people, you know, behind closed doors. We don't need to have those conversations anymore. And then, this is probably what I've just covered, but know your demand, know your capacity, and know your outcomes. Data really does give you that richness of knowledge to, as I say, change the conversation in the system. I'm going to bring Tim in now. So yeah, Tim, do you want to just come in on any points that I've not covered and maybe talk a bit more about how we work with our providers across the market?
Yeah, and there's some really fantastic stuff in the chat that we will hopefully pick up as we go along. So I'm getting a really echo, Anna. Which is probably coming from your mic. That's fine. That's good. So yeah, I guess one of the things I just wanted to raise at this point is you'll see a lot of data today. You'll see a lot of analysis of that data. But that explanation that Anna talked around about the journey between 2016 and where we are now shouldn't be ignored by anybody in other systems, whatever stage you're at in your system. What I would say in terms of the provider market, in terms of how social care providers and the voluntary sector played their part in the development of this system, is absolutely crucial. They feel equals in this system. So there's lots of questions going through in the chat around who makes decisions? Is it an acute decision? Is it an NHS decision? Is it the answer is it's not. It's always a system decision in Somerset, and our providers right back from 2016, and that could be home care providers, it could be bedded providers, really feel part of that decision-making process. They work daily with our acute colleagues as part of this system, and it just doesn't work as an end-to-end system unless you can foster that development. And exactly the same, there'll be a slide later on the voluntary sector, exactly the same with the voluntary sector as well. They can intervene at any moment on these pathways in partnership with people that are working with the people we support to come up with a different option for somebody, to pull people out of what could be a more medicalized model. So I think it's just really important, Anna, to stress that if you're going to build a model like this, it can't be just an acute discharge or an acute avoidance model. It has to be a model for how we support people throughout their journey of care in any particular episode. And ultimately, that support at home, whether it be reablement, whoever it be provided by, it is not actually that different to how we support people in the community who don't come anywhere near a hospital. And we need to remember those connections, and therefore we need to be equal as a system. So Somerset in 2016 empowered quite a few of its providers to work on this model. It did include service user feedback. I know that there's some questions about that, which I'm happy to pick up later on as well. But the key element for us was that we commissioned those providers differently, and I won't talk about that now because, as I say, Anna's got a lot of data that we need to go through and just highlight how we came to some of the decisions and what that means. But I will be happy in the Q&A just to talk around how we've commissioned those markets differently. To give you a snapshot, we absolutely don't commission by the hour in this space. I know some systems still commission by the minute. We don't do any of that with our bedded providers. We don't commission in the same way, or on a weekly fee for a bed, etc. So I'll happily pick that up later, Anna. But it's just really important to, when you look at this slide in particular, don't just focus on the left-hand side. You've got to focus on the whole of the system when you're working through it. Oh, you're on mute, Anna.
Thank you. Right, I'm just going to cover how we do decision making. Can everybody see that? It might be a bit small, but so basically, early on in the pandemic, particularly when the guidance came out from nationally, and this, we picked this up in our review of Home First as well. We realised the decision making in the acutes for discharge was too complicated, and actually, the more it's done on the wards, you're spreading out decision making by lots of different individuals. Some really consultant led, some some adult social care in there somewhere, but the capacity for adult social care to be across all the wards is really difficult. Some done really strongly by therapists, but all actually with very little understanding really of what those pathways are, how they really support people, and actually it leads to poor risk taking. I can't get the word right, but you know what I mean. It's like people aren't willing to take the risks to send people home when actually they could go home. So it leads to less risk taking, less positive risk taking, and it's too complicated and it's inconsistent. So you just get different outcomes for different people according to who's made the decision on that day in the ward with their understanding of what the next pathway is. So what we did, and I've mapped it here because we just really needed to make it clear for everyone. And this is like in the middle of the pandemic, you're trying to communicate across, all your sort of acute colleagues as well. But basically for admission, we broke it down. So is admission required? No. But is support required for this person? Yes. Then is it end of life? Is it a bed or is it home with support? Ring the hub, get it sorted. Is it an admission? Yes. And then is there capacity? We had this in for the pandemic, in planning for when, our hospitals may be overwhelmed and actually we might just have to turn around a lot more at the front door than we needed to. Fortunately, in Somerset, we never got to that stage, but, we had that in as a point of decision as well. So basically, once people are on the ward, then at the end of that person's time, are they medically optimized? It's now, do they have no reason to reside? Yes. Is formal support required on discharge? So the ward just decides, does somebody need support to go home or not? If not, they go home on Pathway Zero. Now, in our Pathway Zero, we have voluntary sector support. We have a bit of community therapy, kind of the ongoing therapy referral. We have, I think that's probably the main sort of two categories of informal support we have in there. And that's just the ward's gift to sort out, figure out and send home on Pathway Zero. If support is required, they then go to that discharge lounge. Now, discharge lounges, whether it's a physical place, whether it's a virtual team, whatever it is, our discharge hubs in our acute centres are multidisciplinary. So they have adult social care, they have therapy, they have intermediate care representative, they have voluntary community sector in them, and they make that collective decision. They look at, so the ward will do the discharge screening tool for every, the screening tool is the same no matter what the needs are. They look at that screening tool and then they decide, is it end of life, is it bed or is it home? So they're not choosing the type of bed, they're not saying going home they need 3 visits, they need 4 visits. All they need to do is basically, is it bed or home? And then once they've made that decision, they know which option to ring on the hub. Now the hub then is, in the discharge lounge, there is the expertise to be able to take that risk on decision, to really know what it is that home can offer. And that's where you get more people home, by having the real strong promotion of home in your discharge lounge. You also need to make home the path of least resistance. If it's easy to access beds in your system, then people will access beds and fill them up. If it's really easy to actually get somebody home, you've got good capacity on that pathway and you've got good wraparound support there, then you'll get a lot more people going home. And then in the hub will then, they'll have a view of all the capacity. So for the bed hub, they know all the empty beds, they know the types of beds, the types of support that someone will get on those beds, and they will match the person to the bed. Similarly, on our home pathway, they have daily access to all of the provider capacity, the area of the county, and they will also, figure out how many visits that person will need, liaising with the provider and get that person home with a key worker. Okay, so that's how we do the decision making. Right, let me just canter
Anna,
on.
just while you do, I said I would jump in.
Yes.
Just on that decision making, there's a couple of questions about it as well.
Yeah.
The people in the hub, and as you say, it's very much a multidisciplinary decision, have taken the time to go and visit those providers, go and visit those settings, particularly the ones they're not familiar with, to understand the skill sets of the teams and to understand, actually who would be best supported in those settings. And that is super important as well. One bed is very different from another bed. Likewise, some home care providers have different strengths. So it's really, really important for them to feel part of that system effort. And when they're making those decisions, they'll be doing it in conjunction with the destination, not forcing them on that destination. And I know, you know, certainly in our system and probably in other systems in the past, it was very much a case of, you know, we've made the decision, so this is happening. But they have taken the time, and it won't be too much of a push, would it, Anna, to say that that hub really has a great knowledge now of the health and social care system that is out there, and that is really important.
And so what we find in times of escalation, so, you know, we had an internal critical incident in one of our trusts yesterday. I think that might be continuing today. It changes the discussion. It changes the discussion in escalation. And, you know, there's just a better knowledge from our acutes about what is, you know, what the intermediate care model is, what we can't do, you know, where our bottlenecks are. And I'll come on to the data in some of that, so because you can see what the whole system sees on a day-to-day basis. So this is our hospital discharge performance. Now, this is April, so a couple of months old, but what you can see here is the big yellowy blob. That is our pathway 0, so hospital to home, no immediate support, and that's 84%. So we've generally had quite good pathway 0 performance from our acute trusts before, you know, we started measuring it in this way, but that is a really, you know, high number, which means actually those who do need support really do need that support. So what we're finding is when you get successful pathway 0s, actually you need to bolster the provision you have in your intermediate care pathways, because you really are getting the people who need support. So then the next sort of line is hospital to intermediate care. So then we've got 15.5% to intermediate care. And then of those, 10% go home and 5.5% go into our bedded facilities. Now, that's generally our performance on a month-to-month basis, give or take a percentage here and there. And most importantly, the hospital to straight into residential or nursing placements, 0%. Before the pandemic hit, we probably had, and I can only think of it in numbers, but we had about 20, 23 a month going in. That was still a low percentage. Oh, is my calendar sharing?
I don't know what happened there. Yeah.
Okay, everyone see my calendar? Yeah, so basically, I've lost my train of thought now. Oh yeah, we had about 23 people a month. I just remember that data point, going from acute hospitals straight into long-term placement as a new placement. And basically, as soon as we put this model in place, as soon as we drummed home that discharge to assess principle, not just on our home pathway, but in our bedded pathways as well, that dropped right off. And now we see 1 or 2 individuals. You know, and actually in April we didn't have any, so that's a good month to show here. But what that does then in the system, and Tim will talk a bit more about and the impact on the care market, is it means that you are taking more complex people into your intermediate care pathways. So when you start seeing high pathway 0s, you get complexity on your pathways. And when you get high numbers going home, so of those that go into intermediate care in this particular month, we have about 75% people of those people go home. So we're pulling those low level beds, you know, the people who used to go into beds and stay for like a week or something, getting, you know, intensive reablement or whatever it is, even 2 weeks. We're getting those home now and supported with higher packages. So we need more capacity on our D2A, because the average number of visits on discharge has gone from 2 to 3 over the last 6 to 12 months, just because we're just getting more people home. And that means those going into beds are more complex. So they really are those longer term cognitive impairment, real slow stream reablement, but we are still getting success on those pathways. So actually the people who go into beds, we're still getting on average, and it varies on month, but between 30 and 50% of people who go on our bedded pathways do go home. So, oh yeah, just before Tim, before you come in, because this will really lead into your point nicely, is we're in the summer. So we set this up in March, or we sort of pulled it together as an intermediate care model in March. By the summer, we recognised that if we were going to hit the percentages going home that we actually knew was right, and we knew that the demand was there in the system, we would have to have way more capacity in our home providers, in our reablement providers, than we had at the moment. So we decided to double the capacity of our home pathway. So we doubled rapid response, we doubled pathway 1, and we doubled our night sitting service. And what that did is, and it took a few months to step that, to do the recruitment, to bring that all on. But by sort of December, January, we had a much expanded home pathway, and that started to pull then all of those people who used to go into beds home and started to hit some of these percentages. So you're never gonna, you know, often most systems, they're just constrained by the actual capacity they have to be able to take that demand home, even if they have the capacity, you know, even if the demand's there and people are making the decision to go home. And that's what I'm talking about in terms of making that the path of least resistance. The first thing you've got to unlock is the capacity. Otherwise, people are going to be waiting 5 days in an acute for a home, and actually, oh, it's easier to go into a bed. And so that's what we really turned around the system, because it used to be easier to get a bed in Somerset. And, you know, touch wood, it's easier to go home, except we're actually, you know, experiencing workforce issues, which I'm sure everyone is. But Tim, I'll just hand over to you now to talk about the impact on our home and care workforce.
Thanks, Anna. I will give you a chance to take a breath and a drink. So thank you. Yeah, I guess what Anna's described, as you say, particularly when we doubled the capacity for people to be able to go home, we did kind of go at risk to do that, but we absolutely knew from our data that it was going to be the right thing to do, and that we couldn't necessarily push that mindset. You're all commenting on the infographic and the great amount of people that we can get home. We just wouldn't have been able to do that without the right capacity in place, and it has to be available and flexible capacity. That is the point. What we've done though, and because probably over the last few weeks, I'm sure you're all in a similar position to ourselves, where we're all experiencing now workforce issues across the whole of our health and care system, and that is hitting us particularly hard in the care at home market. And so we just thought it'd be useful to have a bit of data for people across the system to reflect on, in terms of if you really do want to get people home, and that's where people want to be, what does that mean in terms of what you might need, and what does it mean in terms of how your system might change from a dynamic point of view? So you move away from some of the bedded facilities, but also, you know, as Anna said, you move into more complicated care at home, for want of a better phrase. So there's a few stats on there. I won't read through them all, but probably the biggest one there is, you know, an increase of 60% in the number of hours being sourced. You know, that's just from year on year, you know, per month. And, you know, it's such, in the past that would have been a failure, because we would have thought, oh, are we not re-abling people well enough that, you know, actually their need. Now we see it as a success, and what we see is what Anna was describing, and that's that some of these people just need a lot more support at home, because they are people that would have gone to a bed. And they deserve to be at home and get the right support that we're giving them. So, and you can see that from the increase in the average package size, which is based on, as I say, based on time spent overall with people, not just on hours or cost. And then you can see the subsequent increase in our overall delivery of core care, as we call it, so outside of the intermediate care system, which again, you know, tells us that we're delivering more care for people at home, but does put pressure on the system, and I'm sure we're all experiencing that currently. So it's just really important to understand that. And if I can, Anna, just because there's so many questions in the chat, I'll just pick one up while I'm here. In terms of cost, there's some really interesting questions going through the chat in terms of, well, who paid for that expansion? How do you pay for that providers? It may not be the answer you want to hear, but it wasn't an NHS paying for it. It wasn't social care paying for it. This is a system that pays for everything. And this started back in 2016, where we all said, where is this going to impact on our system, and can we afford not to do this? So our system, it would bore you to death if we took you through our financial schedule, but it's funded from all of our individual trusts, our CCG, from Somerset County Council. So it's a real system initiative. So whenever we expand something, we're doing it almost in the form of a pooled budget, and we're not doing it as, oh, that's social care, you've got to find the money for that. So I guess we can come on to that maybe in Q&A, Anna, as well. And you're on mute again, because yeah.
Yeah, the finances, again, have really helped in terms of everyone's throwing in to a pool. So like you say, when somebody is long on a pathway, it's not like, oh, CCG and now it's 4 weeks up, right? Social care, now you take on the cost. It's just everybody takes the cost of that person. And, you know, we take collective decisions on, you know, where we spend the money. So the money that came down for part one, or actually part one, what we're hoping is part two as well this year, basically is funding that expansion that we expanded last summer. That's the bit in the system that's not on our recurring budgets. So that gap is being filled at the moment by the government pot each time it comes down. And if that stopped, I don't know, we'd have to find it in the system, because we can't now undo what we're doing. So let me get onto the data, because I see there's questions around length of stay and activity and things like that. And I want to canter through this as well. So what do we measure? Very simply, we've got flow data, we've got activity on the pathways, we've got a bit around admission avoidance, we've got voluntary sector activity. We've also got a long-term, an adult social care measure of the pipeline coming into long-term. So the flow out of hospital, very simple. What's the demand? What's your capacity? What's your actual movement? And what are your wait times? Again, I can't stress it enough when it comes to data. Just be simple. Don't try and get your handle on everything. Just pick like 4 indicators that you need to know or something, and just make sure you do those really well. Activity on pathways, we do length of stay, outcome. We try and get some indication of complexity. And then what then is the demand, the pipeline into long-term care. Admission avoidance, what are the referral activities and the outcomes, just so we can get an idea of the activity, and the same for voluntary sector. So I'm going to show you next. This is a picture, and I've only sort of cut a snapshot. Now, what I want to tell you, and probably reassure you, is that sat behind that beautiful infographic and these lovely sort of dashboards are hideous spreadsheets that anybody who knows Excel would probably have a heart attack by just looking at them. They are really complex, awful, and we need to do something about them. But at the moment they work in a very clunky way, and they feed the data that we need to feed. So there's a lot of manual adding in there, and I think that's just, and it's a risk, and we have to validate constantly. But I think that's just the reality of trying to work across organisation, across systems. And actually the systems that we've got actually don't do what we actually need them to do in terms of this, getting the flow working. So, it is a bundle of spreadsheets and SharePoint things that people can see, the patient lists and things like that. So it's very clunky. Sorry, Katie, it's not a magic fix. If anyone has a beautiful system, I think, we would love a beautiful system, but the problem is we don't have the capacity to stop and think about it and actually get one implemented at the moment. We're all just flying by the seat of our pants, using spreadsheets, which I think, is basically what most systems are doing at the moment.
And so Anna, I know you want to get onto the data, but just to leap in on that one, I completely agree on the Excel spreadsheet. Again, just to stress the point, you can only do this with a collaboration of everybody across the system. So a little bit of a glimmer of light for techies in the audience is that we do have an app that our care providers fill in terms of their availability for those pathway 1, D2A, pathway 1, whatever you want to call it, discharges. So they have an app, they fill that in, it tells us every morning what their availability is, where their staff are working, etc. So there's a glimmer of light for techies in there, and I'm sure if we get the chance, we can expand that further to work into this.
Yeah, great. So as what Tim described is these numbers here. So this basically is a screenshot of our sit rep that goes out twice daily. So it's almost live, but not quite. And this basically on the left hand side is all the demand that's coming to our pathways and the source. So the top 4 boxes here are all the different acute hospitals, 2 out of area, 2 within Somerset. And then we've got for discharge to assess the referrals that are coming down from our pathways, a step down to home, and everyone always has an other. I can't remember what's in that box. So basically on this particular day, and this looks actually quite a nice day, we had 27. At the moment, if I look today, it's about 56. So we are just like any system at the moment, just experiencing ridiculous demand. And then the slots available then, so we get our providers to work on 3 hour per slot. So how many 3-hour slots can they give? And they enter that into the app, and then we get that fed through twice a day. So we can then see what the capacity is that we've got up there. We can see how many night sits, and then we just keep a view on what the caseload is totally across the system, so you can see kind of how that's working. And this is split by area, so you can see quite quickly, oh my goodness, we've only got like 3 in South Somerset today, or it's actually where you're going to get those crunch points. Same for rapid response. Now the demand for rapid response is always 0 because it just comes in when it comes in. You can't have a pipeline for rapid response. It's a rapid response service, so that's why it's 0. Same for end of life. You don't really have a you don't really have a pipeline for that. And those numbers are generally very low, and they always stay quite low in this system. So these are the bedded pathways, and that bedded bit goes on a lot lower because we have all of our different types of beds. So the top 2 you see here are our reablement beds. We used to split it by what we would call in the system pathway 2 and pathway 3, but when the guidance came out, actually they were all pathway 2. So there are sort of bedded units there. We've got our community hospitals under there. We look at stroke demand separately as a line on here. We've got older people's mental health as a line on here as well. And basically you can see the total capacity in our beds over here. So that remains constant, like how many beds have you got total? And then each day, these little boxes, we can see how many empty beds there are in those units. And then what's the demand versus the bedded availability. Now, you know, in that point in June, it was a nice day, so I'm using that data. If I gave you the data today, you know, I think we'd all just pack up and go home. The time waiting, we've got the indicators there, sort of up to more than 48 hours. So that's our flow, and what that does is that generates an OPAL status for intermediate care. So when we go on escalation calls, when we're sharing, you know, what's happening around the system, we can speak the same language as the acute trust from intermediate care. We've also got an OPAL status for adult social care, which I'll come on to in a bit. But it just helps us all understand really where are we, what's that temperature gauge of our flow. So when we get into the actual pathways, now this is the data that comes to our intermediate care board on a monthly basis, and this really shows you kind of how we're performing. So the orange line here is the demand on our home pathway, and now we are always above our capacity. So even though we've doubled our expansion, we know we need actually more capacity there on that pathway to really truly do what it needs to do in terms of meeting that demand in a timely way. The blue line is the numbers starting, so the actual discharges on that day, and then the grey line is what the capacity that we said that we had on that day. So you hope that that blue line and the grey line generally meet the same, but if they're wildly apart, you're thinking, well, how can we have capacity but not actually doing the discharges? So these data points really help you get under the skin of what's happening. This is a bit of an indicator of the complexity that we're getting out on D2A. So we're just monitoring the number of double ups that we have. So 2 carers, often 4 times a day, sometimes 3 times a day, 2 carers. And, you know, since we've been tracking that, we then readjusted the expectation as to the slot size. And we can see, you know, over any month, how many double ups are we really holding. We've also just started to do wraparound care, so 24-hour live-in care as a discharge option. We're just trialing it because we understand it's quite difficult to step down from that, but we just recognise that there's sometimes a need to actually have somebody in the home that's more than just a night sit that can help that person really get back on their feet, but in their own environment, particularly for people with cognitive impairment and dementia. So we've got a similar view on our bedded pathways. Now, what's this doing is splitting our dedicated reablement units from our community hospitals. And you can see that demand for the reablement beds is higher than the demand for the community hospitals because we're struggling to get our community hospital beds to fit in terms of type of bed to the demand that's out there. So often, more often than not, but more often than in our reablement beds, the community hospitals come back and say, actually, we can't take that person. We don't have the right skills or staffing for that particular issue. And around cognitive impairment as well is a real issue for our community hospitals, particularly if they don't have the line of sight or they're managing them on wards, side rooms. You know, it's a bit more difficult for them. They also have, obviously, that they operate under a clinical governance model, which actually means reablement is a bit more difficult. You can't get people to take their own medication, for example. Maybe they're on a ward rather than in a room, so they might not have their own bathroom facilities. All these little things that actually have an impact on somebody's ability to reable. And, you know, basically what we can see here is we do need more of dedicated reablement bedded units rather than trying to repurpose community hospital beds to fit the demand. So I want to move on to outcomes now. How do we measure outcomes? Now, on our D2A, we have a lovely SharePoint that has all of our patients on there. We monitor basically their length of stay through that. and then what happens to them at the end of the pathway. Now, that's not necessarily a long-term view. It's not like that 90 days, are they still at home view, but it is, you know, where do they end up? We're starting to get better also at looking at how many visits did they start with, and then how many visits did they end with if they go into a package of care, because that's an indication of reablement as well. But this basically is a standard set of outcomes that we use at the end of every intermediate care pathway, with the exception of end of life, obviously, even from rapid response, you know, basically no further support or a bit of community support. Was it long-term care, self-funded or adult social care? Was it permanent placement? Was it escalated? So from when they're at home, did they have to actually escalate them up to a bed because they weren't safe to stay at home and they enter a reablement unit? Did they go back to hospital, or was it end of life? And we use that as a standard measure. Now, as you can see here, the outcomes really should, and this is what we're trying to sort of promote across our system, outcomes should be the measure and the driving measure across all of your measures when you have the full data set, when you're making decisions about people, because actually you can see from that which is the best option for this person that's going to give them the best outcome, that actually is the best outcome for the whole system. So the more you gain independence for somebody, the less that they will cost, or the more that you'll be able to delay the time that they then need that ongoing cost in the system, if you want to talk in pure costs. So when we make a business case for intermediate care, for example, which we've had to do now a couple of times, we do use acute bed days saved as a measure, but it's not the key driver for that business case. We use long-term outcomes and try and make them convert them financially to be able to show that full business case for the model. As you can see here, as our length of stay has dropped on our D2A pathway, so have the outcomes shifted a bit. So we were achieving quite good outcomes. So the grey is the long-term, grey and yellow is the long-term package of care. You know, here we slipped into some permanent placements, some temp placements, you know, some readmitted hospital. Is that because, you know, we're taking more risks, we're taking more complex people, and actually it didn't work out, so they ended up, you know, going back into beds or whatever? So we always look at length of stay versus outcomes when we look at our activity on our pathways. Right, this is the outcomes in our beds. So what I've done here is I've split this pie chart on the left hand side are just the outcomes from all of our general beds that we use, so all community hospitals, all of our reablement units as well. And as you can see, generally we get about 30% of people going on to long-term placement, 20% going back into the acutes, and here the measure is about 32% who end up going home. So some of these that percentage going home, what I haven't got a breakdown of, and I need to get this better in our data, is how many of those were package of care and how many of those were just home with nothing. Because as I said earlier, if they're home with nothing, they could have gone home sooner. And what we really want from our bedded pathways as a strong outcome, actually, is for people to step down as soon as they're safe to be at home, to continue their reablement at home on pathway 1. Now, you do need really strong capacity on your pathway 1, but actually what that does is that reduces your length of stay in beds really considerably, rather than, so when someone enters a bed, the conversation around that person is, okay, what is home for this person and what do we need to do in this bedded unit to get them to be able to go home? So what is their point of safety by which then they can continue their reablement at home? It's not about what are their reablement goals. When in a bedded pathway, is the reablement goal to get them to the point to get them home. So is their home a bungalow? So let's not try and get them up and downstairs. Is their home able to be a micro environment? Is that something they're used to? Is their toilet really close by, or, you know, whatever? So we're not having to reable them all the way down the corridor and back, you know, to be able to tick off that they can access the toilet. So it's what is home for that person, and what is it that we can get them, you know, what do we need to do to get them to the point where they can go home to continue their reablement? Okay, I want to talk to you about this pie chart. Now, this is our what we call interim beds in Somerset. So these are our spot purchased beds in care homes that when we're under extreme pressure, we just buy because we need to get people moving from the acutes. And now I know all systems do this. We try to avoid it. Over this winter, we had a lot of our units closed because of COVID, so we had to access these. Now, the numbers are quite low because we've reduced down those numbers over time. But I think at one point we had, nearly 100 people in those beds. And what we found was the outcomes are considerably worse for people who go into those beds. And that is because, I don't have to spell it out in this setting, there's no therapy, there's no adult social care in those beds often, and they're just dotted around places that are set up to be nursing homes or sometimes residential homes, where people are not going to get that focused attention to really get them back to their optimized point. So what we're finding is the vast majority do go on to have permanent placement from those beds. A good percentage are readmitted, and the occasional one or two individuals go home. So, and that when we could show that back to our system, you could see the penny dropping in our acute colleagues when they're saying, okay, so that's why you push back on use of interims so much. And actually for us, now we've got pressure in the system, we are expanding our reablement units we've got one particular care home where we've just almost doubled or maybe added 50% to the number of beds that are in that reablement unit by commandeering part of the rest of the nursing home, but making them as far as possible reablement beds, so they're not just scattered across the county and poor adult social care are trying to keep a track of who's where and trying to drum up social care that just is not, social work resource that's just not there to go and do the reviews and make sure people are moved on. So that brings me on to adult social care. So this is close to my heart because these are my teams that I manage across the system. And this basically is showing us what's the pipeline into adult social care in terms of demand. So what we've done with our data, because we track the patients, and as soon as someone goes on a bed in a bedded pathway, we have another big clunky SharePoint system. I mean, yes, we've got Rio as a health system, we've got our adult social care system, but something that brings them all together in terms of a full picture of who's on the pathways, we're just using SharePoint at the moment. And what that tells us is as soon as someone's in those bed and they've seen a therapist, adult social care is connected with them, they give them a proposed discharge option. So they say, I think this person's probably heading for home or heading for D2A or whatever it is, or actually we think this person's probably heading for a placement. So that starts to form a pipeline for adult social care. So we can see, okay, we've got, this volume heading for placements coming out of our beds, or this volume, so here we've got proposed packages of care, 25 coming out, as thinking there's going to be a package of care coming out of our bedded units. Incidentally, I would love it where we'd had no package of care from our bedded units, because you can get them home first to have that assessment for a package of care at home. We're just not there with our capacity to be able to do that. But I think that's because we don't want to assess anybody for a package of care in their own home when they're not in their own home to have that assessment done. Doesn't make sense. Anyway, so this is our pipeline, and as you can see, it generates an OPAL status. So again, we can talk in the same language as our acute colleagues, as our health colleagues when we're on our escalation calls. Adult social care has an OPAL status, and it's very clear what's driving that OPAL status across our system. Okay, I just want to quickly canter through a few more slides to go. Admission avoidance, right, so we have adult social care in our ED departments, and this is just some of the data that we capture in terms of the number of contacts they get. So you can, and we need to get a bit better at this data set, but basically you can see, okay, we had 70 contacts, or I can't really see that. So maybe 120 contacts in this month. Well, what are the ED attendances in that month, and what percentage of those are we actually getting a contact for adult social care, and how many then of those do we then turn around, and then where do they go when you turn them around? So that's kind of what we measure. What adult social care at the front door are also able to do is they can flag, look, we've just admitted, someone's just been admitted and they're going to be a complex discharge. So let's make sure, because adult social care capacity in an acute hospital is very limited. We can't be everywhere on every ward, but what we need to do is target where we do go and how we do monitor people going through, particularly for those mental capacity assessments and things like that, to help support discharge. So adult social care in the hospitals are around our front door and our discharge. They're involved in the discharge decision making, and they do the mental capacity work as well.
And just, Anna, just while you're switching slides, just to say that the only reason we were able to put proper resource into admission avoidance and into ED is because this whole model exists, because it meant that social workers are not having to wander around 59 different wards in a hospital, and we've massively reduced the amount of social work capacity that's needed in an acute, because it's needed out on the intermediate care pathways, and that enabled us then to repurpose some of it into admission avoidance. So I think it's important to understand the win-win by across the whole model, that by shifting resource into different places, you will get different results.
Yeah, and they work very closely into the frailty units as well, in particular. And in admission avoidance, we've got our rapid response service that's been operating now for maybe 3 years, newly expanded as well. And it's just, I'm sure every system has one. I can't imagine a system without a rapid response service, really, because it really does absolutely make all those connections and make sure people are kept, safely at home, and manages through that discharge option. The onward option for those individuals. What we do with our rapid response service as well is we use them on discharge, where we're stressed with capacity, because often there's a bit of that's a flexible capacity in the system, rapid response. So when somebody comes through to the D2A team, and actually you can see that their acute length of stay is 3 days or less, we generally just give them to rapid response, because if their acute day is short, then often their D2A need is short, and they don't need to have that longer term reablement. It works mostly. Sometimes we don't get it and they get referred back into reablement or whatever it is, but that's a general principle that we use. Skill mix in rapid response, we've got healthcare assistants, we've now got therapists in there as well, and we've got some band 7 nurses, I think, or I'm totally going to get this wrong now, but we have a mix. We've enriched the mix in that team in the expansion. So voluntary sector, Tim, I'm going to pass this over to you actually to talk through.
No problem. We said we'd touch on it, and I won't I won't go into any detail on some of this. I guess I would just echo what Hannah said right at the start, is that there are lots of voluntary sector models out there, some of them national, some of them local, but they're very much were all based on possibly what I would say an unambitious model, and quite often we're supporting people that could have gone home anyway, without any support. What we did in Somerset, as Anna kind of alluded to, is we had a number of different Red Cross contracts across our NHS and social care sectors. We brought those together as one, so that we weren't all funding different teams, and it gave us better access and better flexibility. But at the same time, we then joined the Red Cross with our voluntary sector organisations in Somerset, one in particular who runs our village and community agent community sector, and we brought those into hospitals, and they just brought a completely different perspective on, people that they felt could go home. And, there's always those twee examples, aren't there? But they do actually work, examples of people who have hoarding issues, etc., where it was felt they've got to go to a bed first, they can't go home. Well, those community agents, rather than maybe some of those larger voluntary sector organisations, they just went and bought a skip, emptied the house with a family and got on with it and got them home. So them working with the Red Cross and other people has really changed our voluntary sector offer. And now what we have is one phone line for the voluntary sector into all of those options, and you can see some of the outcomes here. The only other thing I wanted to point out on this slide was that isn't one or the other. So just because somebody's gone on D2A or gone into a bed, it doesn't mean that the voluntary sector then can't reach in and pull them out. So you'll see on that graph there, again, I'm struggling to read it because of my eyesight, but certainly from D2A, you can step people down quicker from their more formal care at home options into the voluntary sector, and it shouldn't be, as I say, one or the other. And indeed, you can do a mix and match of care and voluntary sector, which again reduces the amount of care that maybe you need to do for one particular individual. So it's been a real success story for us, built with in partnership with the voluntary sector, and you can see some of the outcomes here, particularly in terms of ongoing support has been massively reduced. So yeah, I won't dwell on it any more than that, Hannah.
Thanks, Tim. I see there's so many crunchy questions in the chat, but I should probably just finish the slides and then we can get into some of them. So in summary then, the data, what do we use it for? So day to day, and this is about your one version of the truth. If you can get there, and oh my goodness, it was painful, and many people tearing their hair out and chasing lots of different people and trying to get the data teams who had so many different priorities through COVID to actually give you a spreadsheet or give you a data feed. It was a challenge, but it really does make a difference. So try and get your daily, you know, as frequent as you can view of demand and capacity that's a single version of the truth that everybody agrees is right. Use that to trigger your OPAL status and your activity for intermediate care. Understand your pipeline coming from the acute. So actually, you know, that snapshot view, this spreadsheets that sit behind that to say, so from Yeovil, for example, we can see how many know to resides, how many are they doing referrals for into intermediate care, how many are with intermediate care waiting for decision, you know, how many have been matched. So Yeovil have their own view of that pipeline that's coming through, and similarly with Musgrove. Pipeline demand for adult social care I've talked about, and also basically this really helps us understand our provider market, see where the stresses are across the county on a particular day, helps us to work with them to understand their constraints when the capacity isn't quite as what we've expected, you know, when we're in our conversations with them. And that, you know, is linked to complexity, that's linked to then their staffing concerns. So now, you know, we're looking, so our acute colleagues, our health colleagues are saying, what can we do to help the staffing in your providers? So we're now trying to get a cross-system solution with, you know, repurposing staff or whatever it is that we can do to bolster up our providers just right now where we're in escalation and trying to sort that out. So the data sort of flips the conversation. So at system level, so we're measuring against our home is best in promoting independent strategic vision that we've all signed up to across the system. The national discharge targets, those percentages, that performance to board, how are we doing, you know, flow, deep dives, evaluations into what's working, what's not working, you know, decisions about have we got the right capacity, you know, we're closing some beds because they're just not getting the people in them. So they're just not the right beds. OK, we're going to decommission you. We need other beds, working with our community hospitals to bring them into line with what the reablement units can do. Understanding broader impact of complexity in the system. So now we can see as the data shifts, as the numbers shift home, we know that those that do go into beds need a different type of support. So what can we do to get that support right? Contract management. I know Tim doesn't like the term contract management, but it's more about that partnership working with providers, as I talked about, and coming alongside this, you know, they kind of work with the system to understand, you know, how they can support us strategically. The forecast activity, case for investment, value for money. So we've had to do a business case. The business case for basically for the expansion, but now for the whole model. So if we took this model away from the system, what would be the impact on acute length of stay, on community hospital bed need, on long-term impact on adult social care? We can articulate all of that now because we've got the data, we've got the costs, we just marry it together and do some forecasting. And our forecasting is based on the CCG's acute flow forecasting. So we can see basically, you know, next November, we're expecting this flow through intermediate care. Now, current days are throwing all of that forecasting out the window, but you can understand the principle. And then finally, let's just talk about what worked well. So one version of the truth, having your system working together well at all levels, that collective ambition. So all signing up, are we all putting our you know, hat in the pot for, you know, the finances, as well as thinking this is a great idea? That commissioning strategy, so the way you work with providers really makes a difference. It unlocks them being being partners, and unlocks the capacity actually that they're willing and able to offer. Expansion of your home pathways. You're never going to get this right if you don't have the capacity to bring those people home. Getting that one coordinating point for your demand capacity, and use data to forecast, make a business case for investment. The challenges, getting to that one version of the truth for data, workforce, social workers, home care, reablement and therapists that are crunchy workforce issues at the moment. Trying to get it as 7-day working. Again, that's a workforce, linked to workforce. Maintaining the principles that home is best, independence is best when we're in escalation. So in escalation, it's the speed, isn't it, that drives everything. Length of stay and outcomes get second position in that sort of hierarchy of what you're looking at on a day-to-day basis. Dementia Pathways, we still haven't got that right. That's where our biggest delays are. We have got an awesome provider now who's working really well for our bedded pathways. We want to get the support better on our home pathways, and we're going to try that wraparound support. So yeah, and the level of complexity that we're now supporting at home, well, the whole system has to carry that complexity at home. GPs, district nursing, adult social care, you know, social care providers, we're all taking now that burden of those people who used to go into beds and straight into placements. Now they're being supported in their own home. Where's the balance of that with the cost versus actually we could support them in a bedded pathway or in a placement for cheaper, because some of these packages are getting really expensive. So there has to be a balance in there as well. And obviously the funding is an ongoing challenge. So that is it. And that's the first time I think I've actually got through the whole data, the whole slideshow. So yay. And let's 15 minutes, I think, for questions. So yeah, Sarah, shall I hand back to you?
Brilliant. Can I just say, if we were in a room together, we'd give you a massive round of applause. And for those of you that can do it virtually, please do. That was fantastic, Anna and Tim. And I think, although it was a canter through, just the number of questions coming through, and thank you for answering them as we go, because that really was brilliant. And I love the fact that it shows the whole picture for absolutely every bit of the system, and really appreciate that. And I really appreciate you going through that. It shows just how many people we've had on this webinar. We were 168 at one point, just how important these issues are for people. And from the questions and what people are now saying, it really shows that not only do we want to have these discussions and hear from places, there's also a lot of really good practice going on, and they are the real issues of the day that we need to sort out. Now, you and Tim have answered excuse me, a lot of questions along the way, but I picked out a few that I thought would be good to go into more detail. And one of them, I'll start at the last one, was about the data sharing with the voluntary sector and others. So part of the conversation has been around how do we share data between health and social care, and sometimes that makes it more difficult to share with the voluntary sector and others. Can you just answer that question? How did you get that agreement to share the data across the whole system?
I'll try my camera and just tell me if I freeze in some uncompromising position, but let's give it a go. So in essence, Sarah, we started by building the ICS data sharing agreement, and then what we did is within the individual organisations that were part of that agreement, so that meant we could share across the whole of our system, each of our contractual mechanisms that we then looked at where we worked with the voluntary sector, we incorporated that agreement within those contracts. So it's a relatively easy thing to do, because actually we already had a data sharing agreement with our voluntary sector and our community sector. So it was only a case of, if you like, almost amending that to include the subsequent agreement that you've then got with the system. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it's not actually as complicated as it sounds. And I guess if you think about some of the support that we used to put in on the wards, etc., it's no different from people having those conversations on the wards and setting them up in that way. So yeah, it's a relatively my IG colleagues will probably kill me. It wasn't that straightforward, I'm sure, but it felt quite straightforward. Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. The other question that's come up quite a lot, and Denise from Hampshire has also said they've got a system, is this bit about rapid response. And the Somerset model, you have it at the front door and the back door. And there's two questions that I think have come up for people in terms of what's the staffing in that, the types of staff that you use, and what's the results for that in terms of managing people out. Just a quick answer on that would be great.
Yep, I can answer that one. So first of all, the staffing mix, I think I sort of covered that as much as I know the detail, but I know that when we expanded, we did then include in there more healthcare assistants, but also therapists and a couple of sort of nurses that oversee that as well. We tried in the funding to get geriatricians linked to the service, and I think that sort of fell short in terms of the funding. But that's definitely an ambition that we wanted to get geriatricians to work across 4 quarters of the county, linking in with Rapid and D2A as well. What was the other question?
Just the impact that it had had.
Oh, yeah,
you may have answered that before.
Yeah, no, I realise I don't have any Rapid data on here, but I think on average we get about 85% of people who go through Rapid who end up not needing anything. The largest sort of demand into Rapid is from our GPs. So that's the main referral route, and the main use of them is to stop admission avoidance. So now what we're doing is we're linking them much more into our 111 service and our ambulance service. Ambulance was starting to use them a bit more, but now we need to get that a lot stronger. So we want to use the control centre a lot better in accessing rapid response. But also, as I mentioned, they are used on discharge. It's only a part of what they do, like a smaller part of what they do, but it eases flow as well at the back door. And it's really that flexible capacity that you've got in the system.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. There were a couple of questions quite early on, and I don't know if we answered them, but about mental health and whether mental health is part of this, and particularly whether the delirium pathway is included in this as well.
Do you want me to pick that up, Anna? So we haven't cracked this completely yet. So we've had a couple of goes at this. Our pathway 3 providers are really experienced in dementia and delirium. So we do tend to use that. Our home-based pathways, which is what we would aspire to, even for dementia and delirium as well. We've tried a couple of models. So we've tried a kind of a hybrid model where somebody could perhaps use a bed, but also step down to home just to get familiar with that. It hasn't quite worked yet, just being open and honest in terms of that. Have we got the right skills and workforce capacity out there in the community for some of these things? I don't think we have yet as a system. So again, just being brutally honest, it's a great story we're telling, but there's still things we want to fix. So I think, yes, I would say that we're catering for quite a lot of that need at the moment, but not right at the complex end. I think that's probably fair, isn't it, Anna, in terms of where I think we've got to, and we're working with our trust. And can I just pick up on the rapid thing, just to clarify for people? So our rapid response service is provided, if it didn't come through clearly enough, by our NHS community trust. So they work alongside our social care providers, and that's been really powerful. And actually, at times, it's helped us with workforce as well, because by having them within that trust, we've been able to tap into bank and other staffing procedures. So it really is a properly crossed over model in terms of how we work together across the home-based pathways.
The other bit that I'm really interested in is the discussions and the training and support that you gave to consultants and nurses with the acute in terms of how to get the pathway naught working. And we're just, colleagues, putting up a poll, because what happens in our webinars is people start to drop off because understandably they've got other meetings to go to, and we just want you to rate our webinar and, well, really the presentation by Anna and Tim, so that we can know whether we've got this model right. So is there something that you could tell us about? It's a bit distracting, sorry colleagues. Something you could tell us about how you went about that? I mean, not so much the content, but how you negotiated that needed to happen.
Yeah, so
that's made you both smile. So.
Made us grimace.
It's a long journey.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, we weren't starting from scratch with that one. I think, with our home first, the way the home first model had worked in the past, the home first coordinating teams were based within our acute trusts. So there was always that culture within the trust then of that home first ethos. So I think, we've kind of come a long way. Because we had to do this when the pandemic hit, so we had the design in place, and we were then going to spend a lot of time working across the wards with our acute colleagues, getting the consultants on board, really explaining to them, exactly how it would work. We didn't do any of that because in the pandemic we just did it. And actually having the discharge policy and the guidance really worked, because it was kind of like, well, you know, we can say this, but actually look, there's a bit of paper that says it as well. And really that's as far as we got with it. We did then try to use some consultants to support us across in the autumn to really start to work with that culture, but then COVID just took over and they had to they couldn't work. So our intention was to work alongside ward teams to get that right. So I think we've still got a long way to go with it. The acutes themselves, because the senior team in the acute, so the chief operating officers, the chief flow nurses, they absolutely believe in this model, and they know this is the right way to do decision making. You know, they're having their own influences across those wards as well. So I think, you know, we've still got a lot of work with behaviour and culture across, you know, all of our pathways and in our acutes, you know, to get that working properly.
Yeah, and just to jump in, Sarah, it depends on what stage people are at in their journey. So Anna's right, 2016-17, those chief operating officers that she's talking about, they went onto the wards and we did things called practice development forums where we looked at decision making. You know, they weren't there as a threat, they were there to learn, but also there to signal to staff that actually we are in this together. So you had the Director of Adult Social Care with the Chief Operating Officer, you know, actually in those practice development forums thinking around, well, why was that the best destination, or is it the best destination for people? So it goes back a long way, Anna's right. And in times of crisis, things can quite often slip back. So you have to keep remembering that. So as Anna's right, you know, as staff turnover, etc., you've got to keep educating people. But the discharge guidance has helped because we're just not making those decisions on the wards anymore, are we? So it's a different dynamic.
And also just having, you know, the mechanism like the referral tool that goes somewhere that's not the end pathway. So it goes to it has to go through the discharge lounge, and the discharge lounge access the actual capacity. So we don't really get consultants phoning direct from the wards to the coordinating centre, because they'll be like, well, has this come through your discharge lounge? Or, you know, so it's just having the mechanisms there as well. You're on mute, Sarah.
Sarah, you're on mute.
That's everybody's desire, I think. I want to finish this properly, and we've only got a few minutes left. There are lots of questions that we still haven't answered. So what we will do is work with Somerset. Sorry, guys, this is yet more work, but just to make sure that we've completed all the questions, and then we can send them out to everybody who we've got. We'll know your email, and if you get them and a colleague hasn't got them, for those people attending the webinar, do please circulate them, and we'll post them on the usual websites, and so that people can access them. There were lots of questions, some that particularly that we'll pick up about CHC. There was a group of questions about continuing healthcare, more questions about funding, and we'll pick up, I think, some of the issues around brokerage and placement staff, where they fit and how the hub works. So colleagues, if you have posted those questions and haven't had them answered, we will put that through to you. Can I just finish then, Anna and Tim? That was a fantastic presentation, and we're really grateful to you for doing it. There will be chocolates on the way to indulge yourself. Not a very healthy response, but we'd be really keen as well just to say to people for other places who might be interested in sharing their experience, we're really keen to continue to do this. One of the things is that I think your experience that you've set out today has really helped to show not only the role of social care in the discharge policy and what we need to be doing, but also that actually this is about home first. This is about doing the right thing by people, and you've really shown how that can happen, but also that it's not easy. This isn't something that you can do really quickly or do really easy. This takes a huge amount of work and commitment, and continued sustainable commitment to each other, building trust and trying to make that work. So really appreciate the amount of work that's behind all of this. And what we want to achieve is to get a way of collecting this data, analysing it, that's easier, doesn't have loads of spreadsheets, but actually what you've done is bring all of the data together to show the picture across the whole system. I think that's really valuable. So just want to say some huge thank yous to you, Anna and Tim, for that presentation. Probably one of the most interesting, best presentations I've ever heard. Real thank you to everybody who joined the session today. And we are running lots of webinars and learning lunches, and there is support from the LGA and others. We work very closely with ESIST and with NHSE if you want some support in your systems, and please look out for those things. Thank you, Fiona. We just popped up some of the improvement programs. Here's our address if you want. If Somerset has inspired you to do that, then please come to us. Have to say we take no credit for the Somerset success. We weren't in there helping you. You've done all of this yourself, and all credit to you. And we look forward to seeing you again. So again, thank you very much, Somerset colleagues, for this. And I hope it's been helpful to people across the country. Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody. Take care of yourselves.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you. Bye.